Welcome to part 5 of this video series on Savage Worlds and Fantasy Grounds. Today we will cover most of the advanced combat maneuvers in Savage Worlds. I have tried to order these somewhat sensibly, however it may still be difficult to follow, so consider this more of an overview of what is possible rather than a full guide. I will provide some timestamps in the description if you want to jump to the different chapters that I'm covering. Almost everything I'm showing today can be found either in effects or in modifiers, which are these two symbols up here in the upper right corner. So if you know, oh, there was something called, I don't know, distracted. How does this work again? You can check in here. You can even search for it down here. Oh wow, everything is distracted, but and you will see, okay, so distracted does trade -2. So if you just need to look something up, just search in effects or in modifiers and hopefully it's there somewhere. Good, we will start with some stuff that I did not cover in last video. And the first one is going on hold. So sometimes doing your action depends on somebody else doing their action first. And what you would do then is you can click on a little button down here if you're a player that says going on hold. I think it looks like the 3 cards here. If you're the DM, you right click the card and you click on hold. It will then automatically move on to the next participant. When you are ready to interrupt, and you can interrupt at any point even while somebody else has their action right now, you request an interrupt. You just do here, go off hold. You see Mason Longbeard request an interrupt. Maybe also say this because as a DM it's really difficult to see this sometimes, so definitely make yourself heard. And then both the person who is currently having their turn and you roll for agility. So let's do this very quickly. And I would have failed, so the zombie captain would be able to finish their turn, and then afterwards Mason would do their turn. If it's the same number, then both actions happen at the same time, and if Mason wins in this case, then Mason would interrupt, do their turn, and then the zombie captain gets to continue. Important, when you are on hold and you become shaken or stunned, you lose your on hold status and you just lose your turn. So be aware that don't just go on hold and think, yeah, I will definitely be able to do my action later. If you're unlucky, you will just lose your turn. Then, I have explained how wounds work, but I have not explained how to get rid of them. Wounds can only be healed within the first hour of sustaining them, called the golden hour. And there are 2 ways of doing that. One is using the healing power. That one is instant, but costs power points. Alternatively, you can roll for healing. That takes 10 minutes per wound. So if you have 3 wounds, you would need to spend 30 minutes to heal per success. So if you roll a 4, you would heal 1 wound, and then if you get a raise, you would heal 2 wounds. If you were to fail, then you would just waste time. And if you have a critical failure, you would actually cause a wound. Let's say that hour is over. What can you do then? You can still use the healing power, however, it will now cost more power points. There is a certain modifier called greater healing. We can look this up for a second. So if we go to the healing power, there is greater healing, including those more than 1 hour old. Costs 10 additional power points, so it's very, very expensive, but it is a possibility. And then if that is not available to you, you can also rely on natural healing, where every 5 in-game days you roll for a vigor roll. On a success, you get rid of 1 wound. On a raise, you get rid of 2 wounds. On a failure, nothing changes. And on a critical failure, you actually increase your wound level by 1. If this leads to incapacitation, you go in and out of consciousness, and every 12 hours you repeat the vigor roll. If you succeed, then you stay in that state. If you raise, you get out of that state and you're no longer incapacitated. If you fail, however, you die. Of course, with all of these rolls, other party members will be able to assist you, so that should help you getting over your negative modifier that you have from your wounds. In addition to wounds, there is also fatigue. Fatigue gives you -1 on all trade rolls, or -2 if you have 2 levels of it. And once you get to level 3, you fall unconscious and may no longer perform any actions. This generally recovers at 1 level per hour, but there are fatigues from different sources, so read whatever the source states how you get rid of that fatigue. The last thing that I didn't cover is pace. So I said that if you click on roll, it will automatically roll the d6 and then add it to your normal pace, and this is not a distance you can walk. There is difficult terrain in Savage Worlds, which just costs 2 movement to move through. You can go prone. It costs 2 movement to move 1 square forward, so everything is considered difficult terrain. Gives ranged attackers against you a -4, while if you are a melee, you have -2 on both fighting and parry. If you want to stand back up, that costs 2 movement. Good, now we have everything covered I wanted to cover in the last video but didn't manage to. So let's get into general info. Sizes. Larger creatures get a penalty when attacking a smaller creature, where smaller creatures get a bonus while attacking a larger creature. That is 1 per size difference. So if you have a creature that is size -2 attacking a creature that is size 0, then that smaller creature would get a +2 on the attack roll, while that larger creature would get a -2 on the attack roll. There are certain armors that are considered heavy armor. This is usually on vehicles, but it can be also on a person, like something like power armor. And those armors cannot be damaged with a regular attack. You need a heavy weapon to hit them. Many powers that deal damage have a modifier that you can add to it, or you need specialized weapons. We'll get later to aiming. That would also be a way to get around heavy armor. Good, then let's come to defensive maneuvers. Cover. You can go behind cover, and ranged attackers will have a penalty when they try to hit you. This depends on how much of your body is covered up and ranges from -2 to -8. Evasion. Some attacks can be evaded. It's generally anything with area of effect, but the effect will list can be evaded. If that is the case, you can roll for agility at a -2, or type in /roll evasion, and then it will roll the agility roll for you already with the -2. Now I still have running on this, so that's why I'm getting an additional -2. I will remove this now so it doesn't bug us with subsequent rolls. But yes, it would be a -2 from evasion. Ignore that -2 from running. Defend. You can defend yourself. What defend does is it gives you a +4 to parry. If you do that, you cannot run and you cannot do any other actions in that turn. So you can only do that. It can be really helpful though if you're trying to get out of melee combat. You can do defend, you now have a parry of 8. So hopefully when you move out of combat, you'll not get hit by anyone. And then support rolls. Let's say we have this really good fighter and you just want to distract that creature so the fighter has a better chance. You would then roll for the appropriate skill and use that to give the person a plus to their roll. For example, to distract an enemy, I would say roll for athletics, and then you do like a athletics maneuver. The enemy is focused on you, and now the other guy who wants to do an attack gets a +1 if it is successful. This is not to be confused with a test, which is something we'll get in later. The bonus can go up to a maximum of 4. Here, success is a +1, a race is a +2. Multiple people can support. A critical failure, however, would be a -2. So this is also possible. There is an exception for that maximum of +4, and that is when it comes to strength rolls. That one can go as high as you can get it. Then we come to some standard combat maneuvers. Ready weapon. Within 1 turn, you can ready up to 2 items. It must be items that you're carrying at an accessible place, so it's not possible to pull something out of your backpack. But if it is in a holster or strapped to your back or something, then that would be possible. You may do cold shots. Cold shots is you're aiming for a specific body part. This can be important because sometimes the armor only covers the torso, and then if you aim for the head or for the limbs or so on, you would not take that penalty of whatever the armor is doing. It may also give you bonus effects. So when you're trying to hit the head, you gain a +4 to damage. Now all of these come with a negative modifier, as you can see here. So if we were to attack the hand, it would be done at a -4. If it's the head, it's a -4. If it is one of the limbs, so the arms or the legs, it's a -2. If you shoot something really small on a body, like, I don't know, if you're carrying an amulet, would almost be tiny. Well, actually, no, a large amulet that you're carrying, I would say, is a small sized. And then something tiny would be the eyes, for example. So just think, and for call shots, it's always important, how large is that item in relativity to me? So if you have that ginormous one-eyed ogre, then firing into his eye, which might be the size of a baby, would not be done at a -6 because that eye is just ginormous. So you might then roll a -2 because that's the more appropriate size difference between you and that item. You can use a cold shot to try and disarm someone. We'll first go to cold shot versus the item itself. You would roll the damage, however you would not get any raises or aces. The defender then must make a strength roll to trying to get above the damage that you've rolled. If it's a failure, the person would then lose the weapon and it would land somewhere on the ground. There is also the alternative way of shooting an arm or the hand, in which case you do the attack like normal. However, there is only a strength roll for the defender if you cause a shaken or wound result with your attack. An alternative way of doing this cold shot would be asking for non-lethal damage. Now, these should only really be done with fists and blunt weapons, but if you argue with your DM and say, well, I'm only shooting the hand, he's not going to die from bleeding from the hand, hopefully. So you can probably figure something out and just come to an agreement with your DM how you can deal with non-lethal damage when you're shooting limbs or hands. Now you see that these are pretty hefty negative modifiers. So if you're trying to hit the head, you're rolling at a -4. You need to reach a 4, so you suddenly need to roll an 8. Unless you have a really good die in shooting or some bonuses that you're getting from something else, it will be nearly impossible to hit. For that, there is aim. You can spend one turn where you do absolutely nothing, not even movement, aiming, and then on the next turn you can ignore up to 4 points of penalty or add a +2 to your roll. This only applies if shooting is the first action that you do in the next turn and will only work on the first shot in that turn. One more effect that might hit you is stun. When you become stunned, you're distracted, you fall prone, you cannot move or take any actions, and you are subject to the drop, which is a +4 to both hitting you and dealing damage. You then need to do a vigor roll every turn to try and remove it. If you succeed, you become vulnerable and may then do your actions like normal. And only on a raise, all of the ill effects go away instantly. You can try to break things. If you attack something motionless, then it has a parry of 2 and you can try to hit. You roll no raises or aces on the damage. And then you need to check for the hardness of the item. As an example, I have a light door and a rope here. The light door has a hardness of 8, so you would need to deal 8 damage with your attack roll to break it down, while a rope takes 4. And you also need to take into consideration whether the weapon you're using can even damage it. So stabbing a door with a dagger and then dealing 8 damage is probably not going to destroy the door, or hitting the rope with a club and dealing 20 damage is not going to help you because you're not really cutting a rope with a club. So take into consideration what weapon you're using. Then we come to melee attacks. There is a touch attack, which means if you don't need to deal damage, you just need to touch someone, you get a +2 to your fighting roll. You can use 2 weapons, and it will give you +1 to your fighting roll if the foe does not have 2 weapons or 1 weapon and a shield. If you attack with your offhand, you have a -2 to fighting, and it gives you no parry bonus. If you are attacking somebody who is unarmed, then your melee attacks gain a +2. If you're doing a wild attack, you gain +2 to fighting and damage, however you become vulnerable. This works for all attacks within 1 turn, and can be combined with other edges. If you withdraw from combat, all the opponents get a free attack against you. You can push an opponent, which is an opposed strength or athletics roll. Both attacker or defender can choose. If you run, it gives you a +2. If you wear a shield, you may add the parry bonus to whatever you have rolled. On a success, you push somebody back 1 square, or 2 on a raise. A push character needs to make an athletics roll. If it was with a raise, then -2, or fall prone. Let's get to ranged weapons. Now we've covered short, medium and long range last time, but there is also extreme range, which is up to 4 times the maximum weapon range. You can only do this if you do the aim action, and it will not reduce the penalty that you have when you're aiming. Your penalty is at a -8 or a -6 if you have a scope, and it only works for ranged weapons, not thrown weapons. There's something called rate of fire. It's mostly on ranged weapon, and it means that you don't only get one attack, but can actually do multiple attacks in one turn at the cost of more ammo. So if we look at this laser SMG that I added, it has a rate of fire of 4. What it means is I can attack up to 4 targets, or one target up to 4 times, or combine however I would like. Now how do I do this in game? You can right click your die, go on number of attacks, and then select how many attacks you want to be. And we'll take 4. And we'll see, now that we are attacking 4 times, it's not using 1 ammo, but actually 20 ammo. So the amount of ammo that you're using is not 4, but actually a certain number. So for rate of fire of 1, it's just 1 bullet. If it's 2, then it's 5. If it's 3, it's 10. 4 is 20. Then I think 5 is 40, and 6 is 60. We can actually check this. 5 is 40, and 6 is 50. Yes. When what you do then, Fantasy Grounds does it for you as well. So let's roll this. And you will see I'm rolling 44 and 1d6. So you're rolling all the shooting dice and then 1 wild die for the entirety of the attacks. Now what happens when you do this is that you get recoil. This is irregardless of how high your rate of fire is past 1. So if it's 1 you don't get the recoil, but anything more than 1 you will get recoil, and it's always at a -2 that applies to all hits that you're firing. You can now choose which one of these attacks goes on which target. So you don't need to state this beforehand, you can actually do this after you do your rolling. And as I said, you can either put it on one target or distribute it on multiple targets, however you would like. Now, if you're going to frequently jump between different types of attacks, a much better way of doing this is we leave this default one at 1 shot, and then we right click and create a sub attack. We call that Laser SMG 4 ROF 4 and define this one as this one. So now if I just want to do 1 shot, I can roll here and I will only do that 1 shot. Or if I want to do all 4 shots, I can roll here and I will do all 4 shots. And I will still take from the same ammo pool. That's a very convenient way. I also do this for some other edges. For example, there is in some settings a modifier. When you attack an evil creature, you get a +1 on damage. So I would then have 1 attack that is normal and then 1 sub attack where I call against evil, where I have the +1 modifier. So I can always roll the appropriate one, and it's very easy to organize them for myself. If you're doing these multiple attacks, the critical failure only happens if more than half of your shooting die and the wild die is a 1. So if all of your shooting die are a 1, it doesn't matter if your wild die is not also a 1. If your wild die is a 1, but everything else is not a 1, you're fine. So it needs to be more than half of your shooting die and the wild die to get a critical failure. Now you see I have rolled some rather low numbers, and that can be important. There is something called innocent bystanders. Now this happens only when your wild die, the blue die, is a 1. So instead of your target, you hit another target. And that is either somebody who is in the line of fire or somebody next to the target. If you have a rate of fire of 1, this only triggers if you roll a 1. However, if you have a rate of fire of 2 or higher, or you're using a shotgun, this will also happen on a 2. So if I had rolled 2 2s here and had a 1 on my wild die, I would then have caused an innocent bystander to be hit. Talking about shotguns. Shotguns add +2 to the shooting rolls. The damage decreases based on range, so this would also be a good use of that sub-attack. It starts at 3d6, then goes down to 2d6, and then goes down to 1d6. And it cannot be used for extreme range. If you have 2 barrels and fire them at once, you get a +4 to damage. There is an alternative ammo called slugs. If you use that one, you always deal 2d10 damage regardless of range, and the innocent bystander is only on a 1. If you're using a ranged weapon in melee, you may only use small arms, so nothing that is larger than a pistol, and you are trying to beat the parry if you're hitting somebody right next to you. If you're shooting at a distant target, then it's just your regular modifier. However, you become vulnerable if you were doing that. Most weapons need to be reloaded. Arrows and stones are free actions, while almost everything else requires 1 action to reload. There are even some items that require multiple actions to reload. Remember, you have multiple actions here, so if it says reload 3, you can still do it in 1 turn, but you cannot do anything else. If you go running and reloading, then you would need to roll an agility roll with a -2 from the running. And if you have a multi-action penalty, that would also be added on top. You can use a weapon that does not need to be reloaded after every shot, like a revolver or a pistol and up, for Suppressive Fire. Suppressive Fire uses 3 times the ammo that you would regularly use, and you have to use your weapon on the highest rate of fire, and it incurs recoil penalties. You place a medium burst template, and then you roll an attack roll. And we have a rate of fire of 4, which means regularly we would use 20 ammo, but since we use 3 times as much, it would be 60. So we'll put that down to 40. And then we apply this on every target inside our zone. And I did not apply the penalty, so I need to reduce all of these to a 3, because the recoil would be applied on that shot, which would mean I missed all of them. If I were to hit, then that means they get distracted. And if I were to get a raise, then they are actually hit. Now, since I'm using a rate of fire of 4, I can hit up to 4 targets. If I had a lower rate of fire, I could only ever hit as many as I have rate of fire. So if it's rate of fire of 2, even if I have a raise on all targets inside, I can only hit 2 targets. However, I get to choose which targets are hit. Now, there are alternative attacks that also cause this area of effect. And the way that one works, so let's say we throw a grenade. We again paint our template. Now this grenade is going to be a medium burst template. We'll use this throw stone as the set-in. And we are currently 5 away. So that means it's already long range. We have a -4 on this throw. We'll throw the stone and hope for the best. Yes, I rolled terribly. Then what we would do next is we roll for how much deviation there is. Since it's a thrown weapon, we will use 1d6. If it is a ranged weapon, like a grenade launcher, for example, it would be 2d6. So we first roll how far it goes away. Now we were in long range, so we would actually triple that number. However, it can never be more than half. So since we have 5, we're going to say it's 6, so 3 would be half. So we can never have more than 3 anyways. Even though we rolled much, much higher, we'll go 3 in one direction. And then we roll a d12 to find out in which direction it goes. Think of it like a clock. So we have 8. 8 o'clock would be roughly this way. So we'll go 3 in this direction. So it would roughly land there instead. So this grenade would now explode and would not hit anyone. If it would have been a success, then any target that touches the circle would be hit. So let's say it hit here, we would still hit the zombie captain and zombie 2 because it still touches the token or still touches the square the token is in. You do not need to cover them more than half like this. No, even if it's just touching a little bit, that's good enough. If it is an attack that may be evaded, then you can roll for evasion. If there is cover in between the center of the medium burst template and the target, then that gives you armor or reduces the damage that you take. Cone attacks work similar, so you can just draw a cone like such. If it's inside, it would hit. However, there is no deviation. You would just miss with a cone attack. Next up, we have tests. A test is a opposed roll between two creatures. First, you describe to your GM what you want to do, and your GM then determines what is the appropriate skill for this. So in this case, I want to minorly distract someone by casting a mini spell at them, so I would use spell casting. Now, spell casting is related to smarts. So I would roll for spell casting, and then that zombie that I have targeted, zombie number 2, would roll for smarts against my spell casting. Now, I highly doubt it will manage to beat that 18 that I rolled, and it did not, so hooray me. So in that case, I can now decide whether I want the target to be distracted or vulnerable. In my case, I wanted to distract it, so I will give it distracted. And since I had a raise, the target is now also shaken. If there are any modifiers, then they would apply. So if that creature is naturally not impressed by magic, then maybe I would get a negative modifier on my spellcasting. If I repeat the same thing over and over, there is actually a steep penalty. Doing it twice is already bad, but a third time will probably automatically fail, where the DM says, no, it is no longer working. So avoid repetition. You can grapple an enemy. For that, you need to be in melee range, and you will get a gang up bonus if somebody is standing right next to you. It is an opposed athletics roll, so both you and the defender will roll for athletics. I'm rolling really high today. And then, so you roll first, and the defender needs to either match or exceed what you rolled to not be grappled. It failed, and it did not only fail, but it's even 4 lower than my roll, which means I have a raise. On a raise, the enemy becomes bound. Bound means the victim cannot move, is distracted and vulnerable, and cannot make any physical actions other than trying to break free. For the grappler, that means they become vulnerable. If that zombie was trying to break free, we would just use the grappling rules in reverse. And there is an alternative way, which would be using strength at a -2 instead of athletics. On a success, you would only go one way up. So there is a step before bound, which is entangled, where the victim cannot move and is distracted. And then it would need another success later to really break free completely. If it is an entanglement from some kind of spell, like there are roots growing out of your body, then allies may destroy that entanglement with edged weapons. For grappling, if there is a size difference, it gives a penalty to the grappler. So here it is not that the smaller creature has an advantage against the larger creature or vice versa. No, if the attacker is smaller or larger, then the penalty is the size difference for the attacker. No bonus for the defender. If somebody is grappled, then the grappler can do an opposed strength roll. If successful, they roll again on strength, and that is then the damage that they cause. Now, I know this was a lot of information to take in, but don't be intimidated and just look up the rules when you need them. As I said, this is more of a general overview to give you an idea what is even possible. And now that we have all of these situational rules out of the way, there is one very big part that I haven't touched on in this, and that is arcane backgrounds and powers. and this will be the next video. Thank you very much for listening and see you next time.